Hello, welcome to Light from Above. My name is David Kenney. I'm the preacher for the Church of Christ in Wadsworth, Ohio. Glad you could watch. I was taking a class here recently at Freed-Hardeman University School of Theology. Class was called Hermeneutics. And it was a pretty challenging class. I had Dr. Doug Burleson for that. And it was a very informative, very challenging class. And one of the books that we used, the title alone I was like, well, this is going to be probably a lot harder than I thought. Called the Hermeneutical Spiral. And there were some things in there. It was written by a gentleman by the name of Grant Osborne. And in that book, there's it's a really chock full of all kinds of great information. But some of it's really complex. But some of it's not so complex. And one of the things that I really appreciated was his definition of the difference between a simile and a metaphor. And I'm sure, those of you who are familiar with English grammar and all that, I'm sure this is very familiar to you. Well, the same kind of thing is true with the New Testament, even though it's in Greek. And this is what he says. He says, a simile establishes a formal comparison employing connective terms such as like or as. Jesus also used similes constantly, and they function in much the same way as his parables, which have been rightly called extended similes. The kingdom of heaven is like, or a metaphor. And my dad would often use object lessons. He was a preacher, and I can remember many of the object lessons that he gave over the course of his preaching career. Well, why do people do that? Why did he use object lessons? Well, Jesus, the master teacher, he used a lot of object lessons, and they were things that were common in everyday people's lives. The challenge is that Jesus, that's a long time ago. And it's not just a long time ago, it's in a different part of the world. So that could be very difficult. So I thought, well, let's do an object lesson. And I thought, well, I like this one that my dad made. And it's about this little flower here. And it looks really pretty, doesn't it? Until you realize that that's a field of dandelions. It's nothing but dandelions in that picture. And my daughter, when she was little, she loved dandelions. And she, like all kinds of little boys and girls, I'm sure, would go out there and she would pick these little pretty yellow flowers and she would give them to her mother. And my wife would put them in little little glasses of water. They'd be all, on the table or on the kitchen countertop or maybe on a shelf or something where she could see that she's taking care of that dandelion. And it was sort of interesting. One day she asked me, my daughter, she said, "Daddy, how come people call dandelions weeds?" Now that's an interesting question to try to answer to a little girl, because obviously you don't want to just say, well, it's a weed and nobody likes it, because she's picking it for her mother because she loves her mother. And I thought, well, how am I going to answer that? Well, I told her, I said, well, some people call dandelions weeds, and all a weed is a flower that grows where you don't want it to. That's all that a weed means. I mean, people, they get irritated by it, but that's all a weed really is. It's just a flower that grows where you don't want it to. Interesting thing, I came across this article by a lady by the name of Heather Levin, titled Health Benefits of Eating Dandelions. Now, I don't remember ever eating any dandelions, but apparently people do. And it was interesting, some of the statistics I came across about eating dandelions. Half a cup of dandelions has more calcium than milk and iron than spinach does. A cup of dandelion greens has 19 milligrams of vitamin C and more vitamin A than carrots. 55 milligrams of dandelion leaves has 535% of your daily value of vitamin K. It's also rich in potassium, folic acid, and magnesium. Rich in fiber. They even say that if you eat dandelions, the greens and all that, it'll actually help stabilize your blood pressure. If you have blood pressure medicine, you may want to look into that. It's also rich in antioxidants. And so there's a lot of medicinal properties in dandelions that a lot of people probably don't think about. Well, one thing I want to tell you about that, you might think, before you go out in your yard and start snacking down on them, you may want to be sure to check with your doctor first, because some people think that just if it's all natural, then it's always good for you. And that's not always the case. My father had trouble with his voice for a while there, and he took bee pollen. And he took that for quite a while. And then I was having trouble with my voice, and he said, you ought to take bee pollen. And so I asked my doctor about it. He said, no, you can't take that. He said, your dad can take it probably, but you can't because your system is different. It'll actually raise your blood pressure, bee pollen will. And so, even, I like to tell people, even hemlock is all natural, but you don't want to be out there drinking that and eating that and that kind of a thing. So you want to be careful. But she had some other warnings about dandelions, about eating them. Don't eat them when they're close to the road. They tend to absorb the pollution around them. So obviously, all those CO emissions and everything, you want to be careful about that. Don't eat them out of an industrial lot, whether it's been recently or a while back. Also, you do not want to eat them in a yard that's been treated to kill them, fertilizers or things of that nature. You want to be very careful about that. But like I said, you definitely want to consult your doctor before you do anything like that. But people do eat them. Now, so let me think about some lessons that we can learn from this little plant here. I'll pick this little picture to show you. This dandelion, has this genus and species, Tassacum officinat, Latin, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but they are very hardy little plants. They're very easy to propagate. They have a taproot that's very fleshly. You ever gone out and tried to pull one up? You can't do it. I mean, I've never been able, maybe one time after a storm where the ground was so saturated, I could go and pull one of them out. But they usually don't come. But what usually happens, they break. And guess what happens when they break? That's how they reproduce. It's like dividing a plant. That's what happens. If that's not bad enough, then you let them grow and they'll have a shoot that comes out of them that has all those little, those little white, I always call them paratroopers. They look like look like a paratrooper with a parachute. And those are all seeds. And when I was a kid, I loved those things. I would love to go out and just blow those things everywhere. I'm sure my neighbors are probably like, get that kid out of our yard. But, that's the way they propagate, is those seeds, because they just go on and on and on. And, they reproduce, and you just about can't get rid of them. They're just that strong of a plant. Well, let me give you some ideas and things to think about the dandelion as an object lesson. And here's the first one. God is the God of the dandelion. He created everything in the earth, the sky and the sea, Psalm 8, Psalm 146, 5 through 6. He created everything in 6 days, Exodus 31:17. He is Lord of heaven and earth, Matthew 11:25, Acts 17:24. In Revelation 4, verse 11, God is worthy. It says, you are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they exist and were created. Have you ever thought about the fact that God has created some things that man can destroy very easily? I mean, take for example, springtime, right? We're talking about how dandelions, you can't kill them. But there's another little creature crawling around, that ant. God created the ants. And and you could step on them pretty easily and kill one of them. But you know what? Their strength is in numbers, not just in their brawn. But Proverbs 30:24 through 28, it actually brings out some rather small creatures that demonstrates the power of God in his creative work. In there, if you look, the ants are listed there, lizards, locusts, and spiders. Now, we think about spiders, and we're like, a lot of people, they screech when they see them, like they've seen a snake or something. But they are very intricate, and they're very powerful, and they're able to get just about anywhere. And that's what the proverb is about them, that they can be in king's palaces. Even though I couldn't get into a king's palace, a spider could. You couldn't even keep them out of there. Well, these little creatures demonstrate God's greatness and his power in his creation. And he created these dandelions. And so when we think about that, you want to think about, and you look at it, you go, it's difficult not to admire them unless you have to deal with them. Well, here's the other part. The other part about the dandelion is just, the other lesson is the dandelion itself. It's a great object lesson. I talked to you about the nutritional value they have, but if you read your history books and things like that, it won't be very long until you come across statements to this effect. There are medicinal properties in dandelions. Matter of fact, if you go to a Whole Foods store or something like that, I didn't do this, but I imagine you'd be able to find something for dandelion tea or maybe dandelion, I have no idea. But I have known about the healing properties of dandelions since I was a little kid. And so I'm sure that's around, and I'm sure if you want to pursue that, you're more welcome to do that. I do remember my dad telling us that he used to have to go out and pick dandelions and feed them to our parakeet. We had a bird when I was real small, and it would get sick. And the vet said, you go out there and you pick some dandelions, you put him in that little bird's cage, he'll be fine. And so I know we're not all parakeets, but they do have medicinal properties. And they sure are a challenging flower to get to grow someplace else, aren't they? Well, they're not that difficult to get them to grow someplace else. That's easy, right? My neighbor, she's a real nice lady. I'm not going to mention her name here, but her yard when I first moved there didn't have any dandelions at all. And I asked her about that one time because I live in a property, it was built around the 50s, and there were dandelions all over the place. You could, hardly get away from them. But her property didn't have any. And I asked her about that. I said, I see all these other neighbors having their lawns treated, but you don't have any dandelions. And I was sort of curious, how'd you do that? She said, oh, well, I had my yard ripped up and I had it resodded and I have new grass put down. And that's why. I'm like, oh, she said, that's why I don't have any dandelions. And I thought, well, for now you don't. Because sure enough, you know as well as I do, those things are persistent. And it is very difficult to get them to not grow in your yard. And so what does she have now? I wouldn't want to tell her, but she may not be surprised, or she may be surprised to see that she has dandelions cropping up here and there. And now about those little parachute seeds, aren't they fascinating? I mean, it is to me, even to this day, if the field blows and I see those things going everywhere, it's sort of neat to watch them. I sort of hope they don't blow in my yard, but hey, there you go. But this dandelion, you can't hardly stop it. It's really a neat thing to think about if it wasn't something that people struggle with. Well, what are some lessons that we can learn? I mean, we learn a little bit about a dandelion, but what are some things that, when you go out into your yard and you look at those things and you think about this lesson, you might remember three things about them. And I would encourage you to think about these three things. Number one, they're tenacious. They're tenacious. If I was to put that in a simile form, it would be Christians are to be tenacious like dandelions. Well, what does that mean? Well, what it means to be tenacious is you don't give up. You don't give up. Sometimes as Christians, we give up too quickly on people. We give up too easily on people. If they don't respond to the things that we're trying, like maybe we invite them to church and they just, or maybe we have a special event we want to invite them to and they're not interested. Or maybe it's this, we may invite them one time and then, they're not interested. They'll never be interested. I don't know why I thought they'd ever be interested. They're not interested. So therefore, there we go. Well, we have to have more tenacity than that. We have to be able to invite people and continue to invite them to our services. We need to encourage people to study the Bible with us and continue to do that. Tenacity means to be very determined, to be persistent, to continue to exist like those dandelions. I mean, just think about it. Even though you don't like this fact, but you're going to go out to your yard and if you're like some friends of mine I know, they do battle with the dandelions. And guess what? Guess who's going to win? The dandelions. They're still going to be there next year. That's tenacity. Christians need to have that same kind of characteristic. We just can't give up. We just can't quit. It's tragic when people leave the church, they forsake the Lord, and it happens. Sometimes we get discouraged when people, they listen to us for a while and they decide, you know what, I don't have anything I want to hear this preacher say anymore. Or I don't want to go to your church anymore because they said some things that I don't like. Or I don't like your services because they're boring, whatever that means. Or I don't like this, and they go on and on. And then we get upset, hurt, sad, irritated, I don't know, pick whatever emotion you want. But we go, I don't understand. What am I doing wrong? Well, maybe you're not doing anything wrong. In John chapter 6, verse 66, some people heard Jesus say some things that they didn't really like. And it was called a hard saying, a difficult saying. And some of them left him. A lot of them left him, to the point that he turned and looked at his disciples, his apostles, and said, are you going to leave too? Well, what's the point? Well, the point is you've got to have tenacity. You're going to have to keep on going. You can't allow yourself to become so discouraged that you quit. If people were willing to give up and leave Jesus himself, do you think you're any better than the Lord himself? No, you're not any better. It's probably the other way around, isn't it? So when we think about the dandelion, we have to think about it's tenacious. It doesn't give up. It keeps going, and we have to be that way too. Hopefully we won't be obnoxious to people, but we can't give up. We just can't do that. Number two, the second one is adaptable. Dandelions are adaptable, and we have to be adaptable too. You ever notice how when they first come up and you mow them down, and then it seems like they don't grow as tall, but they still keep growing. You ever notice that? And they sort of grow just below the blade of your lawnmower. You ever notice that kind of a thing? They're adaptable. They are going to survive. They were here before you got there, and they're going to be there when you leave. They just don't give up. Of course, I don't mean that, we're just supposed to be adaptable in some ways. Like we're not supposed to be adaptable to the world. That's sort of a challenging thing to do because, we're supposed to be in the world, but not of the world. We're supposed to be the kind of people that we can relate to other people, that we can build rapport with them, have friendships with them, and also try to encourage them to learn about God and to obey the gospel. And that could be a challenging thing to do because sometimes, adaptability can be tricky because you want to make sure that you maintain your identity, your Christian identity, but you want to be adaptable enough to be able to relate to other people. Remember Jesus, he ate and drank with tax collectors and sinners, and he was criticized for that because he ate with them and drank with them. Now, did he lose his identity over that? Well, you have some people today, they won't have anything to do with anybody outside the church. I don't know if they're too afraid. I don't understand. But they won't have any, they keep to their own. And you know what? If the dandelion acted like that, the dandelion would have been extinct a long time ago. We have to be more adaptable than that. It's an interesting statement the Apostle Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 9:19 through 23. Let me read this to you. For though I am free from all men, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win the more. And to the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, not being without law toward God, but under law toward Christ, that I might win those who are without law. To the weak I became as weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. Now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I may be partakers of it with you. There are two things I want to point out about that passage. Number one, notice the success rate that he mentioned with that. He says that by all means save some. Not all, not a lot, not multitudes, some. We're not going to be able to convert everybody, but we have to keep adapting to try to do that. Also, Paul didn't become a sinner just so he could appeal to sinners. No, that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about he was able to relate to other people. If people had a Jewish background, well, he had a Jewish background, and he talked to them about that. If they had a Roman background, maybe they're a Roman citizen. And well, guess what? Paul is a Roman citizen, so he could talk to them about that. I mean, you can only go so far because you don't want to end up in sin yourself. But at the same time, you should not cut yourself off like some monk where you can't have a conversation with people. How are you ever going to evangelize anybody who's lost if you're not even willing to talk to them? If you're not able to talk to them? If you're not able to relate to them? You're going to have to be able to do that. You're going to have to be able to relate to people. You're going to have to be adaptable to them. But you have to be careful about it. Like I said, it's a fine line. But you know, there's some lines we have to walk. And talking to people, adapting to them is great, but don't lose your identity out of it. A dandelion is adaptable, but it still remains a dandelion. We have to be adaptable as Christians, but we have to remain Christian. We have to do that. So the second thing we can learn about a dandelion is it's adaptable. The third one that I want you to think about, and this one's an easy one, is they're prolific. Dandelions are prolific. Christians must be prolific too. Or, if you like the simile fashion, Christians are to be prolific like dandelions. And boy, I think that's one that, you know, as you're going out and you look at those little flowers and you think they're tenacious little things, and oh, they're adaptable, and you might, prolific may not be the word you want to use, but that's what they are. They just pop up everywhere, and they just keep coming. You know, you ever been out in the yard? I've had to, you know, I've tried to deal with these things, try to get them out of my yard at one point in time, and you know, and I put some of that. No, I better not say what brand, but I put some of that treatment out there to try to, you know, get rid of them and all that. And, you know, and then I would see the wind would come, and maybe a few houses down, somebody had a whole field of them. And they had gone to seed. They had those seeds on every little stalk. And I would see the wind hit it, and boy, here all those paratroopers would come, blowing right across there. And I'd be in my yard, and it would almost feel like those things had landed in my yard and were already coming up. I mean, these things do not quit. The dandelion is so prolific. Well, we have to be prolific as well. We have to be able to talk to people to convert them to the gospel. We have to be able to do that. Sometimes growth comes in a strange way. In Acts chapter 8, the church was established at Pentecost after Jesus' resurrection in Jerusalem. And they sort of stayed, you know, in Jerusalem, in that immediate area. I mean, they branched out a little bit, but they were supposed to take the gospel into the whole world, not just in Judea or Samaria. The whole world was bigger than that. They may not have cared, but the whole world was bigger than that. Well, how did they get motivated to do that? Now, I want you to think about this. What changed to get them to do what they were commissioned to do, which was go to places that they weren't used to going to, into all the world? Well, let me just read to you this passage about Saul of Tarsus. You know, Saul was killing them. He was scattering them. He was routing them. He was imprisoning them. Well, guess what happened? They quit, and it says, no. Therefore, those who were scattered went everywhere preaching the word. Acts 8, verse 4. They were prolific. They're prolific. If we're to be found faithful to God, then we must be prolific. It says this in John 15:8, by this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, so you will be my disciples. We're going to have to be prolific. So when you look at the dandelions, take a look at this field again. Maybe you'll look at it in a different light. You need to remind yourself that, you know, we need to be tenacious like dandelions. Don't quit. You have to be adaptable like dandelions. You're going to have to interact with the world. Just don't lose your identity in the process. And you're going to have to be prolific like dandelions. The Great Commission is to go and make disciples, make Christians of other people. You're going to have to do that. And you don't have to go to the foreign lands to do it. I've heard it said before, and it's true. The mission field starts right at your door. Actually, the mission field might be within your own house. Thanks for watching our program today. Before we close our program today, we'd like to take a moment and review this roadmap to heaven with you, since the matter is so serious. There are many incorrect set of directions out there, and sadly, so many people are following them. For example, some people have been given wrong turns. They believe things such as faith only, works only, or grace only. Or some attempt to change the order of the turns, being baptized before they even believe. Some people fail to realize what point they are on the map. Don't even open their Bibles yet, and they think they're saved already. As a person travels in a car or takes a hike, it has to follow the proper directions, so we must follow the proper directions to heaven. Let's take a look at the directions on our roadmap to heaven here. You have to look at these passages in your Bible for yourself. We'll just list the steps, the turns on the way. First is to believe or to have faith. And then number 2, to repent, to turn away from sin. Number 3 is to confess that Jesus is the Son of God. Number 4 is immersion, or to be baptized, which is a burial in water to have your sins washed away. And then you're added to the church by the Lord, not by a group of people, or not by giving some kind of testimonial experience or things like that. And then once you're added, you need to serve and worship the Lord faithfully all the days of your life. And the key word's faithfully. You don't waver. And that's very important. We need to keep in mind, too, that in Noah's day there was a big flood, and only people in the ark were saved from the flood. The same is true today. There is no salvation outside the Lord's church. Where are you on the roadmap to heaven? Thanks for watching our program. Please let us know if we can assist you with further information for your journey.
In this world we